The cabin door hadn't even closed yet when I felt it. That low, electric tension in the air that every seasoned traveler senses but can never quite explain. You know the feeling, like the calm before a storm, like something is off, but you don't yet know what. And right then, as passengers shuffled down the aisle with carry-ons bumping knees and overhead bins slamming shut, a sharp, clipped voice sliced through the soft hum of boarding music. A voice that didn't ask, a voice that commanded. That was the moment everything changed. And trust me when I say this, what started as a routine flight turned into a masterclass in patience, pride, and a very personal kind of revenge that no one on that plane will ever forget. She stood out instantly. About 35, sharp blonde bob cut perfectly angled like it had been measured with a ruler, cold, commanding eyes that scanned the cabin like she owned it, posture rigid, chin lifted, shoulders back. She wore a tailored power-red pantsuit that screamed authority, paired with a crisp white shirt buttoned high, no room for softness. This was a woman who believed rules existed for other people and exceptions were designed specifically for her. The kind of person who doesn't walk into a space, she takes it over. And from the moment her heels hit the aisle carpet, she decided this plane was hers. "Excuse me. No, not excuse me. Move," she snapped at a young man struggling to lift his bag into the overhead bin. "I paid for priority boarding. I shouldn't be waiting." Her voice carried, loud enough for half the cabin to hear. Heads turned, eyes rolled. A flight attendant approached with a professional smile, the kind trained to survive turbulence, both literal and human. Karen, because let's be honest, that name fits her energy perfectly, didn't even look at the attendant. She just raised a finger, as if silencing an employee in her own office. "I need to speak to whoever is in charge. This is already unacceptable." Now here's where you lean in, because this is the part most people miss. Power-hungry people don't start loud by accident. They test the room. They probe for weakness. And Karen was testing everyone on that plane, one command at a time. A few rows up, already seated in the forward cabin, was the captain. Tall, well-built, early to mid-50s, about 6'2" if I had to guess. He had that handsome, mature face shaped by years of responsibility, a defined jawline, deep brown eyes that missed nothing, light hair cut short in a practical middle-aged style, and a neatly kept stubble beard. He wasn't in uniform, just neutral, casual clothing, relaxed but precise. To anyone else, he looked like another passenger enjoying a quiet moment before takeoff. But make no mistake, this man was in complete control of himself, and that control was about to be tested. Karen didn't know who he was. That was her first mistake. She marched down the aisle, pointing at seats, barking orders. "That bag doesn't go there. Why is he sitting in my row? I specifically requested an aisle with no children nearby." Each sentence sharper than the last. The cabin buzzed with discomfort. You could feel people shrinking into their seats, hoping not to be her next target. And then it happened. She stopped right beside the captain. "You," she said, snapping her fingers inches from his face, "switch seats with me." The captain looked up slowly, calm, unbothered. Those deep brown eyes met hers, steady as stone. "I'm comfortable where I am," he said evenly. Her lips tightened. "I wasn't asking. I have status, and frankly, you look like someone who can manage the back." A hush fell over the row. This was no longer awkward. This was dangerous territory. The captain smiled faintly, not a friendly smile, but the kind that signals calculation. "Ma'am," he said, voice low, controlled, "you should take your assigned seat." That should have been the end of it, but people like Karen don't retreat. They escalate. "I will not be spoken to like that," she snapped, raising her voice so the entire cabin could hear. "This airline is a joke. The staff is incompetent, the seating is wrong, and now you're refusing a reasonable request. I want the captain informed immediately." And that, right there, was the moment the hook sank deep, because the man she was belittling, the man she was trying to dominate, was the captain, and he wasn't going to rely on flight attendants, airline policy, or authority figures to handle this. No, he was going to handle it himself. He stood. When a man like that stands, people notice. The aisle suddenly felt smaller. His height, his presence, the quiet confidence, it shifted the energy instantly. Karen tilted her head back to meet his eyes, but for the first time there was a flicker of uncertainty. "You," he asked calmly, "want the captain?" "Yes," she said, crossing her arms, "immediately." He leaned slightly closer, not invading her space, just enough to ensure his words landed. "You're looking at him." You could have heard a pin drop. Her face froze, then flushed, then hardened again. "That's not funny," she scoffed. "You think lying will intimidate me?" He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply reached into his pocket, pulled out his ID badge, and held it up just long enough for her to read. Captain. His name, his photo, her reflection staring back at her from the plastic. The cabin collectively inhaled. For a split second, Karen faltered, but pride is a stubborn thing. Instead of backing down, she doubled down. "Well then," she said sharply, "you should be ashamed. This flight is being run terribly, and as captain, that reflects on you. I demand you fix this now." And here's where the suspense tightens, because instead of reacting, the captain nodded slowly. "You're right," he said. "This flight does reflect on me." Karen smirked, thinking she'd won. She hadn't. He gestured toward her seat. "Please, sit down." She rolled her eyes dramatically, but complied, sinking into her seat with a victorious huff. Passengers whispered. Some shook their heads. Others waited, sensing this wasn't over. And they were right. Because the captain didn't sit back down. He walked toward the front, calm, deliberate, every step measured. And as he disappeared behind the cockpit door, the tension didn't ease. It grew. "Let me ask you something. Have you ever watched someone walk straight into a trap they built themselves, brick by brick? Because that's exactly what Karen had done. Minutes passed, the door closed, the safety demonstration began, but something felt off. The engines didn't start, the plane didn't push back. Instead, the captain's voice came over the intercom, calm, clear, unshakable. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We're doing a final cabin check before departure." Karen sat up smug, convinced this announcement was proof of her influence. She glanced around like a queen surveying her court. Then the captain stepped back into the cabin. He didn't address everyone. He walked down the aisle, straight to Karen's row, and every single eye followed him. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "please gather your belongings." "What?" she said, her smile vanishing. "You heard me," replied him. "Gather your belongings." "This is outrageous," she snapped, standing up. "You can't remove me. I paid for this seat." He leaned in just enough for her to hear, voice still calm, but edged with steel. "This has nothing to do with your seat. It has everything to do with your behavior." She laughed bitterly. "So now you're punishing me for speaking up? I'll have your job for this." He straightened, unbothered. "You won't." Now here's the part that matters. He didn't call security, he didn't summon ground crew, he didn't hide behind policy. He turned to the passengers and spoke loud enough for all to hear. "Ladies and gentlemen, this flight operates on mutual respect. Anyone who believes they run this plane is mistaken. I do." Karen sputtered, face red, voice rising. "You can't do this without authorization." He smiled faintly again. "Watch me." The suspense in that cabin was suffocating. People held their breath as he stepped aside, gesturing toward the open door. "You're not flying with me today." She stood there, trembling with rage, realizing too late that she'd lost control. And as she stormed off the plane, heels clicking furiously, the door closed behind her with a final echoing thud. The captain turned back to the cabin, met the eyes of the passengers, and nodded once. "Now," he said, "let's have a pleasant flight." And the plane took off, not just into the sky, but into silence, satisfaction, and the unspoken understanding that sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't loud or cruel. It's calm, personal, and absolute. So remember this the next time someone tries to run a space that isn't theirs. Power doesn't belong to the loudest voice. It belongs to the one who never needed to raise it. The door closed behind her with that heavy, metallic finality, but the satisfaction in the cabin didn't arrive immediately. It hovered, unsettled, because while most people thought it was over, the captain knew better, and so did Karen. As she stood in the jet bridge, face burning, jaw clenched so tight it trembled, she realized something terrifying. This wasn't just embarrassment. This was loss of control. And to someone like her, That was unbearable. Back inside the plane, the captain didn't rush. He didn't bask. He didn't smile. He simply returned to his seat, sat down, and closed his eyes for a moment as if grounding himself. Passengers whispered, but none dared interrupt him. They could feel it too. This wasn't some impulsive decision. This had been measured, intentional, personal. Because here's what most people don't understand. Men like him don't react emotionally in the moment. They collect data, tone, body language, intent. And Karen had handed him everything he needed within the first 5 minutes. As the engines finally began their low, reassuring hum, the captain stood once more and addressed the cabin not over the intercom, but directly. His voice carried effortlessly. "I appreciate everyone's patience," he said. "Disruptions happen. What matters is how we respond to them." His eyes flicked briefly toward the empty seat Karen had vacated, just long enough for everyone to notice. Then he turned and disappeared into the cockpit. And that should have been the end. But suspense doesn't die that easily. Because while the plane taxied toward the runway, Karen wasn't leaving the airport. She was pacing, furious, phone pressed hard against her ear, red nails digging into the plastic. Her voice rose with every sentence. "Yes, I was humiliated, removed. No, I don't care what policy says. I want his name. I want consequences." She stopped walking, heels planted, posture rigid once again. "No," she snapped, "don't tell me to calm down." But on the other end of that call, something wasn't going her way. Her eyes narrowed. Her confidence wavered. Inside the cockpit, the captain adjusted his headset, calm as ever. But his mind was active. He wasn't done, not even close. You see, Karen had made one fatal assumption, that his authority ended at the cockpit door, that once she was off the plane, the story was over. She was wrong. He remembered her words clearly. "I'll have your job for this." Threats like that don't scare professionals. They amuse them. As the plane lifted off smoothly, climbing through the clouds, the captain finally allowed himself a slow exhale. Revenge wasn't about rage, it was about precision. And he had something far more effective than shouting or punishment. Time. Hours later, after a flawless flight and a routine landing, passengers disembarked with smiles, nods, quiet thank yous. A few made eye contact with him, subtle but meaningful. Respect. And then, when the cabin was empty, the captain stayed seated. He pulled out his phone. One message. Calm, professional, devastating. Karen, meanwhile, sat in a rigid airport chair, arms crossed, leg bouncing violently. Her flight had been rebooked, but not upgraded, not priority, and definitely not comfortable. Every attempt she made to escalate the situation was met with the same response: "We're reviewing the incident." That phrase haunted her, because she knew what review meant. It meant eyes on her behavior. It meant scrutiny. And for the first time, she couldn't bully her way out. Her phone buzzed. An email notification. Subject line: "Passenger conduct review. Immediate attention required." Her breath hitched. She opened it. The words were clinical, neutral, emotionless, and absolutely lethal to someone like her. "Due to recent conduct observed and documented, your passenger profile has been flagged for mandatory review. Until completion, certain privileges may be limited." Limited. Her status, her priority boarding, her lounge access, her carefully curated image of superiority, gone. She shot up from her seat, heart pounding. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, fingers flying as she typed a furious response. But before she could send it, another notification appeared. A second email. "Please note, any further disruptive conduct may result in long-term restrictions." That's when it hit her. This wasn't punishment by authority. This was reputation destruction. Silent, systemic, irreversible. Back at his destination, the captain walked through the terminal unhurriedly, hands in his jacket pockets, neutral expression unchanged. He blended in effortlessly, just another traveler. But inside, there was clarity. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't threatened. He hadn't needed security. He had simply let her expose herself. Weeks later, Karen boarded another flight. Different airline, different city. Same attitude, only now tempered with fear. She spoke less, watched more. Every time a crew member walked past, her shoulders tightened. Every announcement made her stomach drop. Because once you've been truly humbled, not publicly, but internally, You never forget it. And somewhere above the clouds, guiding another plane safely home, the captain did what he always did. He flew. Calm, controlled, unbothered. Because the best revenge isn't loud. It doesn't shout. It doesn't chase. It simply lets people become exactly who they are, and then steps aside while they face the consequences of their own reflection. And if you've ever wondered what real power looks like, now you know. Karen didn't scream this time. That was the strangest part. She stood frozen in the terminal, phone still glowing in her hand, reading the same lines again and again, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something kinder. They didn't. Her reflection stared back at her from the darkened glass of a closed lounge door she could no longer access. For the first time in years, she didn't feel powerful. She felt watched. And worse than that, she felt remembered. Because what the captain had done wasn't loud or dramatic. He hadn't humiliated her with insults or threats. He had simply ensured one thing, that everywhere she went in the sky from now on, she would carry the weight of her own behavior with her. Back in the air weeks later, the captain guided another aircraft through a quiet night flight. The cockpit lights glowed softly, instruments steady, sky endless. To him, it was just another job done right. But there was something different this time. Not pride, not satisfaction, clarity. He remembered the exact moment Karen snapped her fingers at him, the assumption in her eyes, the certainty that she could bend anyone in front of her. People like her lived on intimidation because it had always worked, until it didn't. And here's what most people never realize. Revenge doesn't have to hurt to be effective. It just has to last. Karen tried to adapt. She really did. On her next few flights, she forced smiles, she bit her tongue, she followed instructions. But the damage wasn't external, it was internal. Every time she stepped on a plane, she scanned the crew, wondering who knew. Every delayed takeoff felt personal. Every neutral look felt judgmental. She had lost something she couldn't buy back. Confidence without fear. Months later, on a completely different route, different airline, different city, fate twisted the knife just once more. She boarded late, middle seat, no upgrades available. And as she settled in, heart already tight, she heard a familiar voice over the intercom, calm, grounded, steady. She didn't need to see him to know. The tone was unmistakable. The captain. She stayed perfectly still, eyes forward, hands clenched in her lap. She didn't complain about the cramped space. She didn't question the delay. She didn't even breathe loudly. Because power had shifted. And the captain? He never acknowledged her. Not once, not with a glance, not with a pause. To him, she no longer mattered. That was the final revenge. To be reduced from someone who tried to control everything to someone completely invisible. And as the plane landed smoothly and passengers applauded softly, Karen remained seated, letting the aisle clear. Her shoulders sagged. The red power she once wore so proudly now felt like a costume she no longer believed in. And somewhere beyond the cockpit door, the captain removed his headset, calm as always, mission complete in a way no report or argument could ever capture. Because the most devastating revenge isn't being thrown out. It's being shown, quietly, unmistakably, that you were never in control to begin with. And that lesson, she would carry it with her for the rest of her life, forever grounded by her own reflection.